Marx was very, very explicit. If you read the Communist Manifesto, one of the 10 planks, one of the key tenets, the key ideas of this manifesto was the idea that the government should educate children.
I'm struck by the life of another founder of modern education, John Dewey, who traveled to Russia, studied the Russian system, loved this socialist and Marxist system so much that he then came back and established teachers' colleges, and that flooded the school system. How deeply is Marxism embedded in modern public education?
Yeah, Marxism and modern public education are so intimately intertwined that they're basically inseparable, right? Marx was the first one. Now, Marx came after Robert Owen. So Robert Owen kind of pioneered some of these ideas before Marx even came on the scene. But Marx was very, very explicit. If you read the Communist Manifesto, one of the 10 planks, one of the key tenets, the key ideas of this manifesto was the idea that the government should educate children. And you know, people today read over that and they don't think it's a big deal, but they don't understand how unbelievably radical that sounded in the mid-1800s to people who had no conception of government involvement in education. So it's a Marxist idea. Now, John Dewey was a really interesting character. As you said, he was a communist through and through. He believed in the principles of communism. He went to the Soviet Union, and if you want to see what he thought about the Soviet Union, he left a huge paper trail. He wrote all these articles in the New Republic magazine, which are still available today. It's absolutely bonkers. I mean, you think this guy must have just lived in a different universe or something. No mention of the mass murder, no mention of the just ruthless and barbaric persecution of Christians, the effort to exterminate the church. None of that, right? Instead, he's crowing about the wonderful instilling of a collectivistic mentality into the children in these government institutions pretending to be schools. It's just bonkers. And so he ends up taking the system that Horace Mann had laid down and really weaponizing it radically. I mean, you know, Horace Mann would have liked to, I think, seen some of these things, but America was still way too Christian. I mean, when he proposed getting the Bible out of the schools, that was like, really? I mean, what is this guy talking about? How would you educate children without the Bible? By the time John Dewey comes along, we had already been dumbed down. We had already been through a generation or two of this. So by the time World War I is over, for the first time in American history, you have most children in government schools. And John Dewey, without even a close second, became the dominant influence in this school system. He did have one difference of opinion with the Marxists, and I think it's important in the interest of fairness to point this out. Marx and most of his disciples believed in violent revolution. They believed that the proletariat should rise up and essentially wage war on the bourgeoisie, the property owners, the businessmen, the owners of capital, etc. He believed that violence was a critical part of bringing about this utopia. He had this kind of dialectical view of history where conflict is what produces evolution, etc. And so he believed that a violent conflict was necessary to bring this about. John Dewey, in his defense, did not advocate a violent overthrow of the existing system. He advocated for a gradual approach. So he believed in the same end, he just had a different view on the means. Marx said, hey, let's rise up and murder these people, basically, if they want to submit to our new dictatorship of the proletariat. John Dewey said, no, that's not going to be effective. Let's do this gradually. Let's brainwash the children through a government school system. Let's get them little by little to embrace these ideas. He actually pointed to a novel that had been published in 1888 by another very, very prominent American socialist, who, again, has been written out of our history books despite his importance. His name was Edward Bellamy. This guy was so influential that all over the country, these Bellamy societies were popping up, where all these intellectuals would get together and talk about how do we get there. And the goal, as Edward Bellamy put it out, he outlined it in his book, Looking Backward. He outlined this future of a communist America in the year 2000 where there would be no private property, where the family would disintegrate, and we'd have this utopia. So that was John Dewey's view. And he worked really, really hard to bring that view about through the manipulation of children in the schools. He was also responsible for bringing this entire cabal of communists into the United States. We've got a chapter on it in the book. It's called the Frankfurt School. It was the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt, Germany. This was actually a project of the Comintern, the Communist Internationale. And so they set up this institute in Frankfurt where they were thinking, how do we move Western societies toward communism? Because they were honest with themselves. They realized that Marx's idea that the working class was going to overthrow the bourgeoisie was just not going to happen in Western society. So Antonio Gramsci was working on this in Italy. The Frankfurt School was working on this in Frankfurt. Well, the International Socialists, the Frankfurt School, didn't really get along with the National Socialists, the Nazis. And so the Frankfurt School was brought over to the United States by John Dewey and John Dewey's sugar daddy, the Rockefellers. So they bring these guys over here. They put them up at Teachers College at Columbia University. From there, they go over to the University of California system. They spread out throughout the whole country and start pumping these poisonous Marxist ideas like critical theory, like the authoritarian personality is what they used to label the American father. The American father, they said, was authoritarian. His influence needed to be restrained. Why? Well, because they understood that fathers in the Christian tradition would protect their families, would resist any effort to steal freedom, to hurt their families, etc. So they specifically targeted the American father as a giant obstacle in the path to their utopia. But John Dewey, again, the most significant figure probably in public education in all of human history. He ended up becoming the honorary life president of the National Education Association. And he actually founded a new religion, Garrett, and I think it's worth sharing this with people. Him and about 30 of his buddies, mostly from academia, wrote the Humanist Manifesto. The Humanist Manifesto, very important document. You can still read it today. They've got updated versions, but the core is all the same. Basically communism. They say we need to restructure the ownership system and the means of production. We need to get rid of the profit motive. But the most important things are right at the top. It says we believe the universe is self-existing and not created. Right? Direct attack on Christianity. So that was his kind of religion. And ultimately, it's just, the same lie that we heard from Satan in the garden. Ye shall be as gods, right? So you get to determine for yourself what's right or wrong. And then this religion of John Dewey's was actually established as the national religion of the United States by the Supreme Court in 1962 and 1963, as the justice who wrote the dissent explained very clearly. He said this isn't the establishment of neutrality with respect to religion, but rather the establishment of the religion of secularism. So that's John Dewey for you in a nutshell, a communist who wanted to overthrow our system, who hijacked and took control of the public education system, and the rest is history, as they say.
You touched on this idea of a slow, gradual, kind of gentle revolution as opposed to Marx's all-out revolution. And it's very clear now that the Fabian socialists won. The Fabian socialists were those who intended for a gradual, peaceful turnover, and they have won. Even in America, where we see ourselves as a free constitutional republic, we are essentially a socialist nation now. The schools are completely socialist. You talk about the authoritarian father, that's toxic masculinity, right?
That's
Which
right.
is poured out all over us. And every one of these planks has now been established. This episode of Rapid Response was brought to you by CTC Math. Visit them at ctcmath.com today.